Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to trace a really surprising golden thread through history. It's one that connects an ancient empire to the battles for freedom we see happening today. And trust me, it's a story that might just reframe everything you think you know about emancipation. So let's just kick things off with a pretty provocative question to get us started. What if the whole project of women's liberation isn't some 20th century invention, but actually an echo of a much, much older blueprint for how to build a society? Let's dive into that idea. Okay, so to really get our heads around this ancient solution, we first have to understand the problem. It's a system that has defined most of human history, a system you could call the cage of care. For most of our existence, survival really depended on what you could call the family fabric. In a world with zero state support, your kids were basically your pension plan. They looked after you when you got old, and you looked after them when they were young. It was essential, sure, but it came with this profound hidden cost, a cost borne almost entirely by one half of the population. And this is the absolute key, right? This system of care, as necessary as it was, created a kind of domestic cage for women. They were essentially trapped in a cycle of having kids and then caring for them, which made any kind of social participation or financial independence pretty much impossible. Their entire value was tied directly to their role in that family unit, not as individuals. But then, thousands of years ago, a totally revolutionary idea emerged from ancient Iran that offered a different way forward. It was really the first attempt to weave a brand new kind of fabric for society, and it was based on a pretty radical principle. And that idea? It was called Asha, or true order, and it's a universal logic that says for a society to truly flourish, every single member has to be free to contribute. This wasn't just some lofty philosophy, it was an actual state-level policy pioneered by figures like Cyrus the Great, and it was based on even older principles of cosmic balance and justice. And get this principle translated into concrete, documented rights. We have actual historical proof that under the Achaemenid Empire, women could own their own property and, amazingly, got equal pay for equal work. The whole point was for the state to replace the brutal law of the jungle with the law of the just state, where every person's dignity mattered. So what this did was create the very first social fabric, where the state, not just your family, started to guarantee some basic securities. But then, for millennia, it's like this revolutionary idea just vanished from history, only to pop back up again in a surprisingly modern context. Okay, so let's hit the fast forward button, like way forward, about 2,500 years to post-World War II Europe. Because out of the ashes of all that conflict, history, believe it or not, started to repeat itself. And here you can see the mechanics of modern freedom in action. When governments created things like national insurance and public pensions, they took over that insurance role the family used to have. The burden of care for the elderly shifted from individual kids to the state as a whole. And the real insight here is that Social Security isn't just about money. It's a primary engine of social liberation. This right here is the big takeaway. This is the whole shebang. When the state guaranteed security, a woman's survival was no longer totally dependent on her father or her husband or her son. For the first time, she could deal with the state as an independent citizen. Those ancient chains of the family fabric were finally broken, and on a massive scale. Okay, so this brings us right up to today, because all those confrontations we see happening around the globe, they're not just random, disconnected events. They are a direct clash between these two very old models of how a society should work. Yeah, on one side, you've got these dogmatic systems that basically say women need protection. And the result of that is a kind of security, sure, but it's security inside a cage. And on the other side, you have that universal logic, the one that echoes all the way back to ancient Persia that says, nope, what people need for true dignity is freedom. So the next time you see protests for women's rights on the news, whether it's in Tehran or London or Washington, you'll know this isn't some new fight. It is the modern frontline of a really, really ancient struggle between two opposing views of society and where an individual fits into it. What this whole historical line seems to suggest is that history, in the long run, really only bends in one direction. That freedom, well, it isn't just a Western value or a modern idea. It's more like an escapable, universal dynamic that no dogma can suppress forever. And that leaves all of us with one final and pretty provocative question. Recognizing this long arc of history, from an ancient blueprint all the way to our modern world,
We have to ask ourselves, which fabric are we choosing to weave for the future? Which side of this ancient battle are we on?